So thank you for coming to the last session titled The Book of Revelation in Anticipation, connecting the theme of anticipation directly with that of prophetic literature. Today, we very briefly take a look at the Book of Revelation, the last book of the New Testament in context. The Book of Revelation, of course, belongs to that genre of literature called apocalyptic literature. And here, depicted in this iconography on the right is St. John the theologian receiving the vision, that revelation that came to him, and the scribe Prochorus actually detailing in text what St. John was speaking out. The presentation has been jointly developed by M.G. Michael, a theologian and church historian, a sessional academic at the University of Wollongong, and myself, a professor in the School for the Future of Innovation in Society, and a joint hire in the School of Computing and Augmented Intelligence. M.G. Michael has written two 500-page volumes on the Book of Revelation, dating back to 1998 and then again 2003. His first Masters of Arts honours was fascinating. It looked at the number of the beast 666, Revelation 13, 16 to 18, that infamous mark. And particularly, he was interested in background, sources, and interpretation of this 666 conundrum. He finished that degree in the School of History, Philosophy, and Politics at Macquarie University in New South Wales. His second thesis was on the canonical adventure of the Apocalypse of John. Particularly, he was interested in the background, reception history, and traditional usage in the believing communities of the early church from Patmos in 95 AD to the 39th Feastal Epistle of St. Athanasius of Alexandria, 367 AD. MG has 5 degrees in philosophy, history, and theology, and has also taught in schools of computing on information security. He's also the founder of the term Ubervalence in 2006, that subsequently entered the Macquarie Dictionary of Australia and also the Oxford Law Reference online. I direct the Society Policy Engineering Collective at Arizona State University, and I'm also a senior global scientist in the College of Global Futures. I have had the privilege of serving as an editor-in-chief in multiple IEEE publications. And you might be thinking to yourselves, what is a theologian and church historian doing with someone in information technology and national security? And that's a pretty great question. That's what Michael and I often ask ourselves daily, but perhaps answered in the name of the school I belong to at ASU, which is the School of the Future, or for the Future of Innovation in Society. And it's the College of Global Futures. And anytime we use that word futures or even innovation, we are anticipating in some way through the design process, through scenarios, possible implications of our designs, our interventions, and much, much more. So let's begin with a fundamental definition of anticipation. It's the action of anticipating something. It's an expectation or a prediction. And in trying to find the best way I could express myself, I spent some time thinking about an image. Visualizations are quite strong, and I came across this one. As a mother of 3, I keep thinking back to what it feels like, or what it felt like more precisely when I was expecting each of my children. And without going into too much depth, one may anticipate falling pregnant. Today, we can do a test to determine whether or not we can confirm we are pregnant, usually through a typical blood test. Or you might hear in conversation a woman saying, I'm expecting my first child on such and such a date. And this date of arrival is fascinating because there is a level of prediction with that date of arrival. My 2 boys arrived right on the day they should have, and my daughter took 2 weeks longer than expected. So we were expecting for a lot longer and in anticipation of her delivery. Now, this can differ, as some of us know. No one knows their exact hour of giving birth. And there are obvious physical signs that our hour has arrived to deliver the baby. And of course, the signs include contractions, waters breaking, and much more. But what you do find is if you're in tune with your body, you sort of know when you're rather heavy and you're about to deliver. You also don't know exactly who your baby will look like, its characteristics, its behaviors, and I guess you get the idea. but it's all anticipatory. It's all about expecting, and it's all about predicting until it happens. So in the same way, some of us might gain a great deal of inspiration regarding the concept of anticipation when we study prophecy in religio-historical texts such as the Bible. And no surprise, this visualization of a woman expecting is very much in many apocalypses, and we'll get to that in a moment. So the book of Revelation in English, that's what it's called, as it's come to be known. In the original Greek, it was recorded as the Apocalypse of John, and in Greek itself, the Apocalypsis to Ioannou. So we're not really talking Revelation as such, but apocalypse. But let's get to that point in a moment. There were many apocalypses, as I said, the Apocalypse of Peter, the Apocalypse of Paul, written and dating back to 200 BCE. And the Old Testament is filled with prophetic books, such as the book of Daniel. But only one apocalypse made it into the New Testament canon, the Apocalypse of John, through the Consensus Patrum. So the church fathers were eschatological insofar as they believed in the Last Judgment and insisted that the time of the last act of history was known only to God himself. If we look at the etymology of the term apocalypsis, we can see that it begins in the Greek, kaliptin, which means to cover, apo means to un, and if we put those two words together, uncover, to unveil, to reveal. And so in Greek, apocalyptin, as it developed, apocalypsis later on, and then the Latin and Old French into the English apocalypse. What's interesting here is that we tend to forget the roots of the term apocalypsis, and we forget that it is about revealing, to make known through the divine inspiration, to make something secret or hidden publicly or generally known. Unveil means to show or announce publicly for the first time. And finally, to uncover, again, to make known, bring to light, to disclose, to reveal. But when we look at the Oxford definition of apocalypse, rather than an unveiling or a revealing, what we hear is it's destruction. The apocalypse, defined here in the first presentation, is the complete final destruction of the world as described in the biblical book of Revelation. But as we said, apocalypse means to reveal and to uncover. It's not really a book of destruction. The apocalypse in the general sense is an event involving destruction or damage on a catastrophic scale. And here we can refer to existential risk at a global level, such as the unleashing of nuclear bombs and much more. But you can see the subtle differences here in definition and terminology. When we look at the word revelation, again, the divine or supernatural disclosure to humans of something relating to human existence, or a surprising and previously unknown fact that has been disclosed to others. Now, in a number of manifest ways, the study of the book of Revelation, which is a revealing or an uncovering of the promises of God to the community of believers, including the so-named second coming of Jesus Christ, provides an impetus for anticipation. I anticipate the second coming if I am a believer. Believers of the Christian faith have an expectation of the resurrection, not merely as a prediction, but as a stated prophecy that will be fulfilled in a time to come in the future. It's not an anticipation as such that won't be fulfilled, but it will happen when it happens. Now, when we look at times and scales and finality, when something is anticipated, the time scale may not be finite, nor may it even be clear in terms of a date or a time in the future. Unlike the intellectual and emotional state of anticipatory grief in terminal patients and their loved ones, anticipating prophecy in the context of a promise that is yet to be fulfilled can bring with it feelings of hope that human suffering will be overcome and primordial Eden will be restored. And so on the one hand, anticipatory grief, knowing of that time of passing, is torturous to many of us who have been in that situation. And in the other hand here, when we anticipate prophecy, there is a fulfillment and a feeling of hope that human suffering will be overcome. I wanted to note here, for some, religion is considered a game, a feel-good philosophy benefiting the gamer, but for believers that human suffering will be overcome is hopeful, providing restoration and a path forward. In looking for images of anticipation, I looked at two hands that belong to two different people. And in this case, anticipation, therefore, requires patience. It requires faith. It requires constancy of consideration and purposefulness. To anticipate something means we have a trust in its occurrence, and we do not typically require material proof of its inevitability. But when one person stretches out their hand to grasp yours, there is a materiality there. You can sense their hand. You do feel their hand in your grasp. And so there is faith there that the other loves you. But most importantly, it has to do with this materiality of feeling connected. There is a connectedness there. So there's not that much anticipation until that grasp occurs. So perhaps while we're attempting to grasp, there is, will that person hold my hand? Will they clasp my hand? And once you do, the anticipation becomes real. It becomes enacted. It becomes observed. It's a materiality. But I have another picture here, which is that of a hand held out to something. Perhaps that's faith. We're not going to see another hand magically grasp our own. No angel will come to our hope to grasp our hand, but there is faith that someone is listening perhaps, and there is a purpose to all of this living. Again, in another sense, a strong image took my liking. It was about signposts and signs, again, going back to the woman expecting and the contractions and the breaking of the water. So we may also be asked to consider certain signposts or signs along the way, which may point to the proximity of the ultimate event and may provide us with some pre-warning of a time to come that makes an event imminent. I was once at the beach with my children late at 7 p.m. in Australia at a place called Geroa. It looks something like this. This is an image of a beach in Queensland. And the children were playing happily. It looked like a beautiful sunset. And they had buried the youngest in the sand right up to his head. And I started to get a little bit agitated, not because the little one was covered in sand, but that it would take time to unbury him and they would need to wash up and get back to the car. I started to feel, even though it was beautifully beautiful, it went too still for my liking. And an image like this presented itself, and I knew we had roughly 3 or 4 minutes to get to the car, which was not that close. We were the only ones on the beach, and as you see here, a type of jet ski, but there was larger dinghies, and with the air picking up within moments, literally everything was flying off the beach. I literally had to hold 2 of the kids, and my eldest supported me as we took the boards and everything back up. And when we got into safety, I would say it was a mini cyclone that hit us. When we got into safety into the vehicle, though the vehicle was moving, they said, "How did you know that was going to happen?" And I told them I felt it. So we often feel things as signposts and signs, but often don't act when we do feel them, whatever the situation might be. Now, when you take the anticipation of the apocalypse and education into understanding, you can go back to interviews of many diverse data sets. And you can see what people have said before an event has actually taken place. They've anticipated something is going to happen. This one came in 2019 and was titled Anticipating the Apocalypse by Esther Priyadhashini. And she interviews a high school student, and this pseudonym is Phil. Phil was most articulate, it says here, about his belief that a dystopian future of some kind awaited in the world. He stated that the likelihood of some kind of apocalypse dystopian future affecting his generation was as high as 8 in 10, because there are so many different things that can lead to an apocalypse that it would definitely happen, he said. He listed possibilities of a viral outbreak, a mutation of this perhaps leading to a zombie apocalypse, some ecological accident or disaster leading to a global environmental meltdown, or even some catastrophe triggered by war between Russia and the NATO countries. At the same time, Phil hoped that the future might fulfill the promise of space inhabitation so that humans could have an opportunity to do things differently and better. So you can see that young Phil probably predicted two things occurring right now, if not 3 or more, and perhaps we should hire him for intelligence, I don't know, but you can see that in the apocalyptic imaginings, 8 out of 10, he said, some of these will take place. but the events in his own existential risk manner and the way he quantified were depicted in this way. So tick to the viral outbreak, tick to perhaps Russia with some NATO issues and war and catastrophe and perhaps some environmental issues as well. Now, if we look to the news in 2020, a year after this paper was published, what we find is that the coronavirus is bringing a plague of dangerous doomsday predictions. And of course it is, but all is well because this is not the end of the world. Another article says in the Washington Post, according to Christians who study the end of the world, this is not the end. So we see this narrative taking place. An earlier article by Stephen O'Leary talks about the importance of time. Now, here I want to hesitate. For those who wish to take away anticipation from prophecy, to hurry up a revelation or a divine promise, what we then have is an interpretation that is more secular in thinking than religious in spirit. And ironically, according to many Christian commentators, could lead to the identification of false prophets themselves, as noted in the sacred scripture. As such, people that try to hurry up the end times may be viewed as spreading conspiracy theory because no one knows the hour of the day, or the day, of the second coming except for God himself. So in the one hand, we're told, we're chastised through the prophetic literature not to hurry up the anticipation. You can't hurry it up because once you do that, you are corrupting the actual ultimate event. And looking at Stephen O'Leary's paper here, commenting on someone's volcanic predictions, he says, just as apocalyptic arguers have repeatedly ignored the scriptural injunction against calculating the time of the world's end, so Browning consistently ignored the cautions of reputable seismologists against predicting earthquakes for particular times and localities. The geologists and seismologists who lined up in opposition to Browning's argument repeatedly stressed to no avail that current knowledge of earthquake science did not allow such specific predications. A panel of seismological experts convened by the US Geological Survey characterized Browning's record of earthquake predictions as what? About as accurate as that of someone throwing darts at a calendar. So you can see those people who are trying to bring time sensitivity into predictions are causing harm, and actually their predictions don't mean very much. But it is fashionable for people to make predictions, particularly with reference to Revelation, and we've seen that repeatedly throughout history for anyone who studied the subject. Now, what happens during a misinterpretation of eschatological timeframes? It can get very destructive, as we'll see here. So we've often seen in history, and with some devastating results, a bad faith anticipation directly linked to a misinterpretation of eschatological timeframes by fundamentalist communities, or a purposeful erroneous reading by others for power gains. This forced anticipatory behavior has often been responsible for the phenomenon of the religious cult and the cult leaders such as David Koresh and Jim Jones, and the list goes on. A passage here from Jones, who frequently warned his followers of an imminent apocalyptic nuclear race war. He claimed that the Nazis and white supremacists would put people of color in concentration camps. Jones said he was a messiah sent to save people. It goes on, and that after the apocalypse was over, they would emerge to establish a perfect communist society. Now, what do we know from that? 918 Americans died on the 18th of November, 1978 in Guyana, of all places, where Jim Jones in Jonestown had a bullet to his head, and many other people died. This was the rise of the cult. This was the rise of the false prophets, the false teachers, in terms of dates, times, and other things that would sort of brainwash communities. So anticipation is not new. Prophecy itself is not responsible for anticipation. For Christians, anticipation has been there forever, but has been prevalent since the time of the Old Testament and the birth and death of the historical figure known as Jesus Christ. People anticipate things on a daily basis. For example, we expect the sun will rise in the morning and set in the evening, or that the tides will ebb and flow. But when there is human intervention alone to extrapolate meaning about prophecy, which is not of the consensus of the church at large, the church universal, that can lead, and oftentimes does, to ultimate peril. Now, prophecy, it has been well said, might be spoken once, but this does not mean it has to happen at once. In the books of Daniel and Revelation, for example, like a triple helix, the past, present, and future are somewhat intertwined. This twisting and turning of time is common to apocalyptic literature, and together with the central drama of universal conflict, good versus evil, it underpins the narrative character of its genre. This has led to various views of the apocalypse: the idealist or spiritual, the preterist, the historicist, and the futurist. And the idealist view, just very quickly, does not take a literal historical or futuristic fulfillment, but sees the book in its entirety as a symbolic presentation of the battle between good and evil. The preterist view, if we go next, sees Revelation as largely fulfilled in actual events that have now already happened. The historicist, a running account of the whole of the church history written in advance from the time of John, 95 AD, to the return of Jesus Christ, whenever that might be. And the futurist view sees everything beginning with chapter 4 and onward as yet to be fulfilled into the future. Now, before I move on, despite these manifest differences in the timeline of the end times, most of these interpreters will hold to the essential teaching of the book, which closes the New Testament canon, that the church is called to overcome her tribulations in history and to endure, to conquer, and to emerge victorious in the final conflict. Critically, what is also lost on those who deduce meaning from prophecy outside its proper context and setting, it's Sitzemleben. It's that prophecy in both the Old and New Testaments is not always connected to foretelling or to the anticipatory events. In fact, Sitzemleben in the German phrase means the setting in life. It stands for the context in which a text or object has been created and its function and purpose at that time. As we know, the Christians were being persecuted by the Romans when this apocalypse was written. Not rarely, biblical prophecy would also mean to teach and to admonish, to hold people accountable before God, to encourage and to make straight that which has set off course. And so a prophet is one who is above all called, commissioned to announce and to proclaim in endurance. Anticipation in the context of prophecy does not require what-if scenarios, nor does it require scenario planning, nor is it exactly predictive like a guess. It's an assurance in the promises to come, with a full understanding that as fallible human beings, we can never know everything, including the place and time of our own last breath. And as a prima facie example in this unknowing of our final destiny, we can say we can anticipate and to have hope in the resurrection. The former is the mystery of life and the reason why every day is a new day filled with potential, and the latter is a choice that each individual may consider as a personal belief and possibility. So in other words, to conclude here, our central focus as human beings, whatever the case may be, whether we're a believer or non-believer, it's to go about our business as best we can, to allow the events to unfold, not to focus on end-time scenarios or scenarios we concoct and to get to that point as an end-time event, whatever that event might be in our life, and certainly not instigating them, as that is a sure path to destruction, but rather living our lives to their full potential and allowing for the progress of history, for better or for worse, to complete its course. We do have agency in these fulfillments, particularly in our behavior. So with that, I'd like to thank you and again, acknowledge MG Michael for his support and Arizona State University for hosting this conference. Thank you.